Shalom and a very warm welcome to each and every one of you, our very valued and esteemed viewers around the world. You're tuning in to a program that we call People Making a Difference. And today we have a very special guest whose life for more than 6 decades has made a tremendous difference here in the land of Israel. You won't want to miss this interview. Stay with us to meet Zipporah Porath.
Hello, my name is Jay Rawlings, and for 30 years now I've produced films and documentaries as well as TV shows about Israel and her people. Today with IsraelVision.tv, our new broadband internet station, you can join our growing audience and enjoy hundreds of programs and news shows from Israel about Israel, keeping you informed and in touch, and it's for free. Enjoy Israel at your fingertips with www.israelvision.tv.
Welcome back, and we're so glad that you can join us today in our studio of People Making a Difference, and we're so thrilled to have an authoress, Zipporah Porath, with us, who's written letters from Jerusalem concerning her time as an eyewitness of the creation of the State of Israel. Zippy, it's really good to have you with us. Thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here, but especially to come to Jerusalem. Something happens to me when I hit Jerusalem. I don't know if it's the heady altitude or what. And I must tell you a little incident. I do a lot of talking to groups, and I was invited to talk to a ladies group, I don't know, 9 in the morning, 9:30. I live out of Jerusalem, and to get up, I slept over at a friend's house. I get in a cab, and the driver is driving around. And although I haven't lived in Jerusalem for many years, he is there 3-4 times at the same place. And I said, "Excuse me, but shouldn't you have turned to the right?" Well, I could see at the back of his head, stiffen. Drivers and men in general do not like to be told where to drive. But he was doing it again, and I did it again. And I said, "Excuse me, but shouldn't you have turned left?" I knew where I was going. And he stopped the car, and he turned around, and he said, "Are you a Jerusalemite?" And I said, "Well, I lived here many years ago." "When?" I wasn't about to say before you were born. And then I said, "Well, as a matter of fact, it was during the siege of Jerusalem, before the beginning of the War of Independence. And if it wouldn't have been for people like me, you wouldn't be driving around freely in Jerusalem in a taxi now." He gives me a full look, and he says, "An antique." So I said, "Listen, bud, you're not insulting me, because an antique gets more valuable as time goes on. And now I'm really a valuable antique, being around for the 60th, 61st anniversary of the State of Israel."
That is so true. And we're delighted to have you. It's an honor to have you as a guest on our program today, Zipporah. Your book, Letters from Jerusalem, is such a fascinating really a rehearsal of amazing time in the history of the Jewish people and history of the world. You wrote these letters as a young woman who was here as a student, really, but you were also a journalist. Is that correct?
Well, I was like being from the outside world, getting the perspective of the outsider. I was a journalist major in college, and I was here for a year of study at the Hebrew University when the United Nations on November 29th, 1947, approved the establishment of a Jewish state, an Arab state, and Jerusalem was to be an international area. I still have the map of what was to have been. The Arabs could have had their state at that time. Everything that's orange was the proposed Jewish state, 5,500 miles. Everything that was green was the proposed Arab state, very little less, 4,500, and Jerusalem was to be an international enclave. Well, of course, everybody went wild with joy at that time.
Well, it was the original first two-state solution.
Exactly.
And that's what they're still squabbling over today.
Squabble. They could have had it.
They could have had it. But why didn't they accept it? Well, the Jews accepted it, but the Arabs didn't. Why
nobody
didn't
was
the Arabs
happy with
accept
it, but we accepted it, the Jews, because it was better than nothing. It was the beginning of trying to find a solution to this very long history of dissension and difficulty.
But I believe that the Arab peoples, who've actually had 7 different times over the history of the recent modern history of having 2 states, 7 different opportunities have come. And Abba Eban, the great Israeli statesman, said that they've never failed to miss an opportunity to get their state. You know, and I believe, now correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that they didn't accept it because they wanted it all.
They simply do not recognize our right to exist. That has not changed.
That's the question.
And the terror of those days are still affecting our lives today as they did then. So nothing has changed, and therefore when I'm talking about my letters home, they could have been written yesterday or today, and that's what's so special, the timeliness of them.
So these letters really are universal. They're not out of date. Now, Zipporah, tell us, put us into the picture. Our viewers want to know, here you are, a young lady about, we won't ask your age,
early
about 20
20s.
years old.
Early 20s.
Early 20s. Here you are, an American, grew up in New York. Your father's a famous Hebraist and teacher educator.
And a prominent Zionist as well.
And here you are. Why did you come to Israel at that time anyway?
Well, it wasn't really. I mean, every Jew thinks about coming to Eretz Israel, but not tomorrow and not the next day.
Next year.
Yeah, but I didn't have a choice because my father heard about a scholarship that was being offered at the Hebrew University. Let me put it this way. We're talking about 1947 when there was a British mandatory government here. To come, you needed a visa. To get the visa, you needed a British visa. The British were not giving visas except to two internationally recognized institutions, the Hebrew University and the Hebrew Technical Technion.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you were depriving a refugee of a certificate. And that's why getting a visa was a big thing for American, or at least the circle of American Zionists, that if you could get to Eretz Israel, to Palestine, the Holy Land, let's call it, then you were in, and that's what happened. My father heard about this scholarship which being offered, submitted an essay I had written on why a Jewish state. Then, when it wasn't even being discussed, look, all his Zionist activities rubbed off on the family. I mean, that's the way it was in our family. We lived and breathed Hebrew education. My father believed that the 3 attributes of nationhood, the people, the religion, the language. And he forced us to speak Hebrew at home in America. Gave me this name Zipporah, which means bird. You can imagine that in the 1st grade. Where is Zipporah, the teacher, or Zipporah, whatever they called me. I got round-shouldered already in the 1st grade with a name like that. Whoa. However, it means bird. And he submitted this essay, and to my great surprise, I'm invited for an interview by the committee who was offering the scholarship. And to my even greater surprise, I win a scholarship for a year's study with a valid visa and a year of tuition at the Hebrew University.
As we say in Yiddish, it was beshert.
Wow.
It was divinely ordained.
Fate stepped in and gave me this chance, and I'm a big one for moving ahead with whatever is available. You got to water, swim. And what I did was do, in Hebrew we say choshvim. I thought about it, talked to myself, and I said, look, here's a chance to see what being a Zionist means in Eretz Yisrael, and not sitting at Zionist meetings in New York.
Not theory.
A year out of my life.
Not theory, practice.
So what happens is that I arrive as an outsider, as you say, looking at what's happening, but then getting caught up every minute more, and especially from the 29th of November, in the possibility of a real Jewish state. And I don't know, may I take a moment just to read the letter I wrote home that day? Please. I won't read it, goes on and on. Incidentally, this is what a letter looked like. The original letters were a Palestinian
airmail letters.
Airmail letter. There wasn't even a paper factory. You couldn't buy a pad of paper.
No.
So I wrote on these. You wrote on the inside. It's addressed to my family in New York from Pension Pax New Montefiore, Jerusalem, Palestine. And it cost, I can't see, but I think 5 mils. And then you could write inside, and then you could write on the back. Now, I always typed because I could get more in, and I always ended with a few words, genuine handwriting. Why is it in red? Because I left in such a hurry, I didn't have time to buy a black ribbon. And I didn't realize I couldn't buy ribbons. In America, you think wherever you're going to go, you'll buy it. It doesn't happen that way. So this was the letter, and these letters I began writing from the moment I got on the boat. And catching the excitement and the, I wanted to just read this quote. When you mentioned the book being published, one of the critics said, "Chunks of genuine history deeped into the deep freezer 50 years ago and now defrosted for the reader of today in all their original freshness." So that's what I was doing, giving them a blow-by-blow account.
Okay, what were you going to read something?
Yeah, I was going to read the letter of November 29th. Dearest Mother, Dad, and Naomi.
Now this, ladies and gentlemen, this is the day that the UN voted to partition the land of Israel into 2 states, Arab and Jew.
The morning after, because we were busy, wild with excitement the night before. Sunday morning, 11 a.m., November 30th. Dearest Mother, Dad, and Naomi is my sister. I walked in a semi-daze through the crowds of happy faces, through the deafening singing of David Melech, the King of Israel, lives and is alive, past the British tanks and the jeeps piled high, with pyramids of flag-waving, cheering children. I dodged motorcycles and wagons and cars and trucks, racing madly up and down King George Street, missing each other miraculously, running boards and headlights overflowing with layer upon layer of happy, elated people. I pushed my way past the crying, kissing, tumultuous crowds and the exultant shouts, what do Jews when they shout, Mazel Tov, and came back to the quiet of my room to share with you this never-to-be-forgotten night. And then I go on a little bit, which is important, that Ben-Gurion, who was the nominal head of the Jewish state-to-be, had just arrived from Tel Aviv, and sure enough, there he was, standing on the balcony of the Sukhnut building. He looked slowly and solemnly around him to the rooftops crammed with people, and he raised his hand, and in utter silence awaited his words. Blessed are we who have been privileged to witness this day. I still choke up.
Amen.
And he concluded with, long live the Jewish state, because it didn't have a name, and he said Hebrew state, incidentally. I never corrected it in the book. It doesn't have an, and he called for Hatikva, which is the national anthem. And everybody was so choked up, and tears running down them. Emotion was more than they could handle, and there were few dry eyes. It was too big, the feelings for that moment. And he touched the flag that hung from the rail, and he had this shock of white hair, and proudly put his hat up, and he shouted defiantly, "We are a free people." And then I write to my folks, how I wished you could have heard his words and been there for that memorable night and never to be forgotten morning. Well,
now this is just 2 years and a bit past the Holocaust, when the Jews had not been free people.
This
never been free for these centuries.
For 2,000 years. The dream was to have another Jewish state 2,000 years later. So that was the moment, but it didn't last very long, because that very afternoon, the roads, the Arabs began to terrorize the roads. And there was already a very big incident with on the road to Haifa. There was only one intercity road from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv. That is the essence of the problem. There was only one road.
And that road was sieged.
Wait, you're moving ahead too fast. Yeah. The Arabs were situated on the hills above, easily descending. You were mobilized, even if they started convoys already, because you couldn't travel alone. You were mobilized the first truck and a convoy and everything else. And then they descend and take all of the supplies. And that's what the whole sieging of Jerusalem, which it took, we're talking November, and the war didn't officially start until the state was declared in May, on May 14th.
Yeah.
But all of that period between November and May was the terrible period of the onset of the siege of Jerusalem, isolating what would be the capital of Jerusalem and the heart of the Jewish people from the rest of the state.
Yes, and 40 minutes ago, driving up from your home
Exactly.
on the coast, we passed all those vehicles that are still there on the side of the road to remind all of us forever of that siege. Now, Zipporah, you became a do you want to talk about your experience?
Well, I have to talk about it because it's part of me. Yes, because here I am. We were about 5 American girls who came knowing Hebrew. Our families all knew each other.
Yeah.
It was kind of a thing, you know. When they heard about my scholarship, they somehow found a way to come. And we were in like an extended family. And the 100 or so American veterans of the war, of the World War, who were entitled to a GI Bill of study rights in any university in the world they wanted. Well, our fellows were Zionists. They had been captain. One was the captain of the Air Force. He marches himself up to the Veterans Administration and says, I don't want to go to the Sorbonne. I want to go to the Hebrew University. So there were about 100 on our boat, which was a reconditioned troop ship. I don't know what they reconditioned, one big slab of gray, you know. Mm-hmm. But at our end, the Hebrew University sent a lecturer to orientate us about studies in Hebrew and to get a measure of each of us. At one end. At the other end of the boat were a group of Americans of Jordanian nationality who were going to the University of Beirut on the same GI Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
But this was early. We hit it off. We were companions on the boat. There was no place to sit, back to back. And there was even one guy who had a crush on me, Eddie the Arab, they called him. He marched around, you know. He's teaching me, I'm teaching him Anu Banu Arza, and he's teaching me in Tabinta, I don't remember the words. We're all having a good time. 2 things we didn't discuss, religion and politics.
Yeah.
But young people have enough to talk about. And
so now, tell us about, we want to get into your life there as a medic,
yes.
And then about how you met Yosef.
Oh, that's the end of the war. I mean, you're jumping far. Yeah, I was on the war on my own. I didn't meet him here.
Okay. This is her husband-to-be.
Yeah, this was my war. He had his own war. And then he had several wars after that as well. As I said, we American girls found other English-speaking girls from Holland, from all kinds of English-speaking countries, South America, South Africa. The point is that everything was clandestine. You couldn't have 3 people meeting without the British knowing about it. Mm-hmm. So everything was underground. Yeah. And the underground organization was recruiting a lot of young people like us who spoke Hebrew, who could be helpful. And that's how I got enlisted. One told the other among the students. And I'm invited to meet, to go to this and this cafe. And there'll be a man sitting there with a cap. If the cap is down, sit down. If the cap is up, don't sit down. He'll have a newspaper on, cloak and dagger. He'll have a newspaper. If it's under his arm, get up and follow him. If it's on the table, don't. But I forgot all the instructions, but I did get up and follow him to meet another man. 3 of these, so that this is clandestine activities. Then we get to a building, and it's the basement of the Rehavia High School. I knew the building. We weren't blindfolded or anything. There was no lights. What I'm going to tell you is we were grilled. We were 5 girls. We were interrogated. Why did you come? They didn't understand why an American would want to be helpful, And suddenly, we must have passed muster. We're confronted in one hand with a Bible, in the other hand with a pistol and an oath of allegiance. And we walk out of there. We're in the army now. I mean, we were all excited. We had been inducted into the Haganah. We had no idea what it meant. And that's where you ask about the medics. The first assignment, because we girls who were well endowed got 2 hand grenades to put under our bras to march arm in arm with a Haganah boy. The British were very polite. They never searched women. But if a male Jewish Haganah man, underground, was found on penalty of death. So we carried the arms and we were as out on a date. And then they're shooting. Of course you duck, and I said to myself, my God, I'm going to blow myself to kingdom come before I've even made a mark in this country. I've got to find something else to volunteer for. And that's how I went for a first aid course. And I passed, and I must tell you, we first aid courses. Here I am, it says first aid for
that's your armband.
My armband, and I'm number 347.
Wow.
And this was like being confirmed as a nurse for a field medic. Okay, so the story is that the morning that I passed the test, the night before, there's a terrible, terrible explosion in Jerusalem. Then there were no high buildings, so the sound could be heard from one end of the city to the other. And no, I mean,
was
terrible.
This on Ben Yehuda Street?
This was the first rumor. Nobody knows, but everything is rumor. And we were very fast. We hear it's Ben Yehuda Street, the first Ben Yehuda Street morning. It's been going on since then. So I take my first aid kit and I take my armband and I march myself to look for the war. And they don't let me through. What has let me through? There were no barricades. There were hand by hand, the home guard, one in each hand, holding back the crowds. They're not letting me through. Why? They heard English accent. Now, the English were the enemy. They had no idea that there were other kinds of English. And finally, I get very angry. It reminded me of 9/11. People are digging with their hands.
Yeah.
Every hand is needed. And I said to them, can't you see I'm a medic? Let me through. Let me help. Well, finally, I persuaded them. I get inside, and I can't find a first aid station. So I did what really made me a celebrity later. It's managing with what you have. I took my lipstick. I made a huge shield of David in a doorway. And in 2 minutes, I was in business. Everybody knew what that meant. It was a sign of a first aid station. So I gathered children. It was just 6:45 in the morning, this explosion. People were on their way to work, children. One woman who couldn't speak any language to this day, I don't know if it was Romanian or Czech or what, held on to me with every fiber. She had just come from the Holocaust. She didn't know where she was. She had she had just moved into a room on Ben Yehuda Street. And at the end of the day, when I managed to be very helpful, and I don't know, can I read one thing from that? Because at the end of the day, I go back to my room and I take her with me. I smuggle her in. We're not allowed to bring in. And I give her my iron, what did we have? An iron bedstead with a straw mattress. And I treat her wounds. She had some light bruises. And I give her a cup of tea and I put her to sleep. And I sit in a chair with a candle or flashlight, and I'm writing this. Are there words to describe senseless human tragedy? Can I ever forget this day? It was my first aid for the first time. I'm becoming like the Jews who live here. Every shock and sorrow nurtures them to grim restraint and fierce dedication. And from that time on, I wasn't writing they, talking about the local community, but we. So that's how I got introduced to first aid. And then, as I said, I got introduced because I was used to set up first aid stations where they weren't any, and there was nothing to make them out of. That was my kind of thing.
Zipporah, this is an amazing history that you're referring to in the first person. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I'm so sorry we've run out of time so quick.
Oh, we never even got to the war.
We didn't get started, so we'll have to have you back as another time, that's for sure. But in the meantime, we want to encourage you that are viewing, our viewing audience, to write into us at our website that's on the screen, and we will pass on the names, your names. If you're interested in getting letters from Jerusalem by Zipporah Porath, wonderful book, an amazing anthology with a foreword by Sir Martin Gilbert, one of the greatest, foremost historians in the world today. So we encourage you to write in immediately to get this book. Thank you so much for being with us, Zipporah. We appreciate you very much. You're a sweetheart. We love you. Bless
Thank you.
I think this is not the first time
Thank
that
you
we're
for
going to be interviewing you. And ladies and gentlemen, we ask you to please go to our website. We would be delighted to have the opportunity to serve you. If you'd like to make a donation to our work, we depend on free will offerings by the good hearts of people that watch our shows. Thank you very much from Jerusalem. And this is Jay and Rawlings and Zipporah Porath wishing you shalom from Jerusalem.